All right, so Robert's Rules training. My name is Jeremy Blosser. For anybody that doesn't know me, I am the standing bylaws committee chair of the Tarrant County Republican Party. I've served as parliamentarians or parliamentary resources for various conventions, multiple rules committees, all that kind of stuff. I'm one of those rules people. And this session is on Robert's Rules of Order. For those that see people running around with the book in their hand or saying things at microphones like parliamentary inquiry, and I object to the consideration of the question, and I want to reconsider that motion, and want to know what we're talking about, or want to be able to interact at that level some yourself. I do this class differently than a lot of people teach Roberts. A lot of people will come in and give you full spreadsheet charts of precedents of motions and lots of tables of which things are which and all that. I don't do that because most people that I find that are trying to learn Roberts, what does motion precedence even mean? They're not there. They're not at the 200 level where they need a flow chart. What they need to understand is principles and how the heck you're supposed to read this book. So I do this as how do you read Robert's Rules of Order? How do you use this book? It's designed as a reference manual. It's designed to be something that you don't read and memorize inside and out. It's not stream of consciousness, or as issues came up, they got included in here, like the legislative code is, for example. It's written as a bit of an encyclopedia. It's meant to be in your hand, and if you need something, you look it up in the index, find it, and can use it immediately. And so the goal here is to teach you how that works, right? Teach you what the structure of the book is and how to do it, how to use it. To that end, we're mostly going to walk through the book and call out different sections. I'll call out a few things here and there that are very relevant to conventions, but I'll also call out things like, this is where conventions are described in the book, and these are all the other types of meetings that are also described there, so that if you get a more overall view of things and not just the political party convention or political party county executive committee view of things that can kind of skew stuff sometimes. These first couple slides are not on your handouts, but they're copies from the slides that I use when I do convention training. At each level of the convention, I get a little more into Roberts. This session will go even deeper, but just to kind of ground us and some things to walk away with no matter what else you do or don't take away from this. Robert's Rules overall, it's a book to provide the rules to keep things fair. It's to use a sports analogy, it's what defines your foul, your 3-pointers, your overtime, that kind of overtime. That kind of stuff. It's not a book of magic spells, a bunch of fake Latin a la Harry Potter, and you have to use it the right way. You don't get to talk and you don't get recognized. It's not a book of weapons for how to make sure that those other people you don't like don't get to say anything. It's meant to keep the situation fair for everybody, so that as a meeting with a bunch of people who have different opinions starts to become contentious, starts to have some disagreement, you're at least not arguing about who gets to talk next or what's the proper way to change what you're talking about right now. Instead, you already have that predefined for you. And you have a flow chart, a 1, 2, 3, 4 to walk through to get things done. Come on in, please. Have a seat. And then those next few are just, like I said, copy from the other slides. We'll talk about them more in depth as we get to them. Overall principle to understand also is that the majority is always in charge, but the minority always has a right to try to become the majority. So this is, a rule book to provide for that great principle of Western legal systems, rule of the majority with respect for minority rights. And we'll get into that a lot in a little bit here.
Rules. Oh, this is good too. Okay.
Yeah, there's, I guess, a credentials meeting somewhere in the building. Maybe it's 6:30, but this is not it.
6:30. Yeah, but okay. I'll watch you.
This is the slide I use for SD conventions. It gets a little bit more into it. We will get into all of these as we go. But there's a handy cheat sheet for SD conventions, the stuff you might need to know. Like I said, it's not on these handouts, but if you want the SD convention training, that video is on YouTube with this attached to it. I can get you the address.
Are you saying this here is, this lesson you're giving is all on the internet?
It will be as soon as this video's up.
Oh, okay.
The precinct and SD trainings are up there though. Hello, Robert's rules? Or
No.
credentials? Yeah, the credentials is Ask Jennifer.
Since that's gonna be on there, I'll depart.
So anyway, to the meat of it, the rest of these slides and what you have handouts of, except for the blanks I've given you to fill in if you want to, is the table of contents of Robert's Rules of Order. Just cut and paste it. That's all we're gonna use as handout, because that is the whole point. I'm not trying to interject. I'm not trying to add. I'm not trying to certainly not give you a different view of Robert's Rules than what the book gives you. I'm trying to show you how to read the book. So typographic conventions in here as we go. Most of the stuff at the front here is bolded. As we get in lower, it won't all be bolded. Bolded are things I'm going to pause and talk about because they'll come up at a convention, most likely. The other stuff is useful, but may not come up at a convention probably, so look it up on your own time. And then on the sheets you have, the italics by the blanks are not phrases from the contents. They're words in the text that I added to frame the blanks that are there. Overall, the book is divided into, naming. Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised, abbreviated RONR. Why does the abbreviation even matter? Because there are 3 different types of Robert's Rules of Order. There's 3 generations of it, okay? First one was a book written by a guy named Henry Roberts, way back in the beginnings of this country, when he was seeing the new American experiment come together and parliamentary and legislative bodies start meeting and seeing, there would be differences from the parliamentary system that had evolved in Europe over the years, and also that there wasn't really even a codification of that was over here yet. So he wrote a book that was very stream of consciousness, these are all the things that you run into just one after the other, called the Robert's Rules of Order, abbreviated as RRO, Robert's Rules of Order. And if you look on the internet, you'll find Robert's Rules of Order, the old editions out there for free, public domain. You can still find old copies and half-price books, etc. But it was fairly rough, good information, but kind of hard to pick up and use necessarily, or have everything you needed. His family, the Robert family, has persisted in maintaining this book throughout its generations. The current edition primary editor is Henry M. Robert III. They've stayed on top of it. And several years into its publication, they went and approached it to reorganize it and called that Robert's Rules of Order Revised. And the goal there was to just kind of clean things up, put it in a more sensible arrangement. It was still fairly stream of consciousness, still kind of looked like a legislative code where it's just point, not really meant to, it was kind of thing you did have to read and kind of memorize. And so several years later, they came and approached it to do a full reorganization to make it appropriate as a reference manual. Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised. RONR is the name they gave to that document. And yeah, it's structured very methodically, very particularly. Again, you can find the older versions online or find them for free, and a lot of people might, when they want to get into this, they'll go find one of the old editions and walk into a convention with that. You can try to do that, just understand that you're going to have outdated information, you're going to have some wrong information, and most societies that use Robert's Rules of Order specifically, they'll state we're using Robert's Rules of Order Newly Revised, the current edition. Whatever the current edition is today, that's what we're using. The 11th is current, looks like this. Came out in 2012, just before or kind of during that convention cycle, so there can be a point where you switch. It doesn't have a lot of differences from the 10th. The 10th is still the one you'll find used the easiest. It looks like this, except it's this light brown color that's the border here. The whole cover is that color. Is the 10th, and it's not a lot changed. This one started dealing with things like electronic meetings, how to have teleconferences and things like that, while still maintaining the principles in the book. Renamed some things to try to clarify them, things like that. The 10th is still fairly accurate, but if you're going to a meeting where you expect to have to use the book, have the current edition, because you want to be using the page numbers, and obviously the page numbers change. A note on that, if you look at the book and how it's arranged, you will see that there are a lot of ways to refer to what you're talking to. It's very similar to the legislative code in that way. You have chapters, right, just like a regular book. You have page numbers, just like a regular book. But then you also have section headings. So like page 7 or chapter 7 has section 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22 in it. Just like a chapter of the election code or the penal code. And then, and the book inside of itself will refer to things by chapter. It'll say if it'll make a reference to disciplinary procedures and say, see section 61. It won't give you a page number. So if you're reading the book, and you see a 61, you go look on page 61, you're not going to find it. That's why. You can look in the contents to see where 61 is. But you also have, along with chapters, section numbers, page numbers, you have line numbers. So at a meeting, if you need to go up there and say point of order, Robert's Rules of Order, page 268, line 20 says, that's how you get to it very quickly, and the people on stage that are helping can get to it very quickly.
How often do they revise that?
Every couple years.
Oh, wow, that often.
Yeah. When they need to.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where as soon as this one was printed, they started on the next one. And when they have enough gathered together, they think that it justifies a new edition, they'll do one. I don't actually know when the 10th came out, but it's every I don't know, several years at least. Then the overall structure of the book, right? This is an intimidating book to people. It's very large. It's over 600, 700 pages, right? It's not scary when you know, again, the secrets of how it's laid out. And the most important secret of how it's laid out is that you only really care about the first 100 pages. And I don't mean the first 105, 99, I mean the first 100 pages. This is page 100, chapter 5. This is page 99. You care about the first 100. So if I skip the table of contents in the introduction, talking about this much content, okay? You can read this in a few days and it will make sense to you. And this is the part that covers everything you need to know. And we're for 80% of the cases, and we're going to walk through this in pretty good detail. The rest of it, for the most part, is taking the things that were discussed in these first 100 pages and going into all the edge cases, all the details, all of the consistent characteristics. Every motion you might make, does it need to be seconded or not? Does it need to be? Can it be debated or not? Is it a majority or a 2/3 vote? These kinds of things, and that's what the rest of the whole book does. It takes the things that were covered in here and gives them to you in great detail and covers every edge case. It gives you scripts. If you want to make a motion to do this, you stand up and say, and it's right there, Mr. Chair, pause for recognition. Chair recognizes you. Then you say, I move that we such and such. And then the chair should say. Literally, that's all in there. Resolutions, whereas, be it resolved type language. The form of a resolution down to what punctuation you should use. Commas versus semicolons is in there. So it gets into great detail. That's why it's that thick. You don't care about that most of the time. After you get through those pieces, high level here, you get into a section that is not really about the individual motions, but kind of broad cases, things that people who are going to run a meeting need to know about, like what's a dilatory motion look like, what's, overall principles described in detail like quorum, rules governing debate, how do you do votes, how can you do nominations, those kinds of things. If you're going to form an organization, how are you supposed to do that? What should your bylaws look like? What things do you need to consider? Nothing you care about at a meeting that you're just participating in most of the time, but the chairs would need to know, or the people putting together an organization would need to know. And then you get to your index, which is really important, and I should list it on these notes, but index is very solid. It's look up, the thing I want to make, I know right now I need to reconsider something, look up reconsider, boom, there are the couple of pages. It's going to give you 3 or 4 references. The first is going to be inside the first 100 pages where they talked about it for 2 sentences. The next is going to be like a 5-10 page block that tells you where to find it in the main section. And then they're going to have 3 or 4 cross references where other things talked about that thing you're looking up. It's very easy, once you know the layout of the book, to look in the index and find the thing you're looking for in about 30 seconds, which is about how long it takes to run from your chair to the microphone if you need to. Also has the section that's colored gray along the edges, and that's shorthand for the big section, but it's in table form, so you can see all the motions. And then, does it need to be seconded? Can it be amended? Can it be debated? All, just yes or no format, which some people find useful. I usually just want to read the text. I'm talking really fast because I'm on the clock. But good so far, I hope. So the book, table of contents. We just walked through. Introduction of the book. Introduction to the book is relevant. The preface first. The preface tells you that history stuff I already talked about. This is who Henry Roberts was. This is the book he wrote. This is why we revised it. This is why we revised it some more. That's all in there. The introduction covers more of that stuff. Things like early origins of the English Parliament, development of procedure, parliamentary process brought to America. That's all the history pieces. Principles underlying parliamentary laws. The first one I've got bolded, and then I'm going to actually read from, because this is really important stuff. And you've got some blanks here. Don't worry about filling these in as we go or anything like that. It's there if you want to. If you don't fill it in now, take this home, buy your copy of Roberts, start reading the book, and fill it out from that. And it's great practice for finding what you're looking for. Call it homework. But overall principles. The rules of parliamentary law found in this book will, on analysis, be seen to be constructed upon a careful balance of the rights of persons or subgroups within an organization's or an assembly's total membership. Balancing rights among people is the whole point. That is, these rules are based upon general regard for the rights of several groups, the rights of the majority. Right? The majority has a right to eventually get their will done. That's the point of majority rule. The rights of the minorities. So protection of minority rights. The minorities have rights to speak in debate, to have their voice heard, whether they win or not. They have a right to do something and not get stomped all over. Especially a strong minority greater than 1/3. So there are certain vote thresholds that care about whether you have only 1/3 of the people with you, or you have a majority of the people with you. The rights of individual members. Individual members have certain rights that the whole body can't take away. A minority of one has certain rights in Roberts that they can always assert, and the room has to comply. Basic right of participation. Someone can't show up, be a member of the assembly, and they stick your assigned seat is in another building across the street. That's violating your right to participate. They can't do that to you, which is different from disciplinary action, where they might have an ability to tell you got to leave the room. But rights of absentees. People not present have rights. If you have an assembly of 100 people and 2 of them show up to a meeting, they can't just do whatever they want to. The 98 that aren't there have rights. If you have 100 people and 98 show up, the other 2 still have rights. And then the rights of all of those together. Again, balance is the key word here. And that's the whole point of parliamentary procedure. Whether you're using Robert's rules in a group like a convention, or you're using Jefferson's manual in the U.S. House, or you're using Mason's manual in the Texas legislature, that's the whole point of parliamentary procedure, is to find the balance of those rights. They find it different ways. They're dealing with different types of people. The legislators are, for example, elected representatives of thousands of people. They inherently carry with them the voting rights of those people, so they're approached a different way than you or I showing up at a precinct convention as ourselves are. But the overall goal is that balance. Moving on. Deliberative assembly, its types and their rules. So first we define a deliberative assembly. We have the idea of what a parliamentary law is supposed to accomplish. How does a deliberative assembly fall into that? Page 1 of the book, the first one actually labeled the one past all the preface and introductions, is key, critical stuff. And the bullet points there are very worth committing to memory, because if you're ever at a meeting where those bullet points are being violated, or you're ever running a meeting and violating those bullet points, you're doing it wrong. All right? Robert's Rules, bullet point number 1. A deliberative assembly, which is a group of people coming together to talk about stuff and figure it out, the kind of gathering to which parliamentary law is generally understood to apply, has the following distinguishing characteristics. Point 1, it is a group of people having or assuming freedom to act in concert, meeting to determine in full and free discussion courses of action to be taken in the name of the entire group. All right, let that sink in. It's a group of people having or assuming freedom to act in concert, meeting to determine in full and free discussion, courses of action to be taken in the name of the entire group. That's why you're there. So if somebody's coming in and trying to keep somebody from participating, or trying to, run something through that only a minority wants and the majority is opposed to, they're doing it wrong. Second characteristic, the group meets in a single room or area under equivalent conditions of opportunity for simultaneous oral, AURAL, communications among all participants. That one's one people often gloss over, but it's pretty important. It's a core principle of a deliberative assembly, that you're in a room where you can see and hear each other. That really matters in 2014 when we're getting into teleconferences. A teleconference meeting of a body acting under Robert's rules that, for example, has 100 people on the phone and mutes everybody, and you have to push a button to raise your hand and be recognized to talk, is violating that principle. The ability to interrupt people when they're talking is important. The ability to object to things that are happening without being recognized is important. The ability to hear people speaking in debate and be heard when you're speaking in debate is important. And one of the reasons they came out with an 11th edition was to talk about electronic meetings and how to preserve those characteristics, even when you're meeting by teleconference, or worse, by email, which isn't even real time. It's great to have technology. It's great to use technology, but we can't forget these principles and how not abiding by them changes the nature of the communication that's being had. But the third characteristic, persons having the right to participate, that is the members, are ordinarily free to act within the assembly according to their own judgment. So you don't surrender your brain at the door. You don't walk in and immediately, you're not in 80s era Moscow where you walk into the Kremlin with a Politburo and you're now a party operative and have no opinions of your own on pain of death. However, in any decision made, the opinion of each member present has equal weight as expressed by vote, through which the voting member joins in assuming direct personal responsibility for the decision should his or her vote be on the prevailing side. So you don't leave your brain or your individuality at the door, but you do accept responsibility for the votes you're going to cast, for how you're going to maintain yourself, etc. You're a responsible actor. Failure to concur in a decision of the body does not constitute withdrawal from the body. So you're going to have debate, you're going to have discussion, you're going to have votes, you're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Losing doesn't mean they get to kick you out the door or ignore you forever on. Deliberative assembly is going to have the give and take. And then last principle of a deliberative assembly, if any members are absent, as is usually the case in any formally organized assembly such as a legislative body or the assembly of an organized society, the members present at a regular or properly called meeting act for the entire membership, subject to limitations such as quorum. So your group of 100 people might have 60 show up. They're going to go ahead and act on behalf of the whole, within the limits the body has placed on how many people have to show up to have a quorum to do certain kinds of business. Fair enough. Those are your principles. Like I said, those are worth at least the first few, really understanding and committing to member, because if you're in a meeting and they're being violated, that's the smell test. Something is not right. No matter what part of this book they're reading at you, they're probably interpreting it wrong. Types of a deliberative assembly. There are several. Couple that are relevant to convention season, several that are not, but we'll list them all anyway, because like I said, this book isn't just about conventions. First is the mass meeting. Mass meeting is the most basic kind of a deliberative assembly. It's one that has the most minimal requirements of participation. It's usually in the form of we're having a meeting at this place and time. Anyone who meets very basic criteria can show up and participate as a voting member. So your church has an annual membership meeting where all the church members in good standing are able to show up and participate. They don't have to be an elected representative or something. They don't have to be a dues paying something. They can just show up. Our precinct conventions are mass meetings, as an even more direct example. Everyone who is a registered voter in that precinct who's affiliated with the Republican Party can show up and be a participant at that precinct convention. Period. They don't have to have donated or are volunteered down here. They don't have to be elected a delegate by anybody. They have to meet those very minimal criteria and they can show up and participate. When you're forming a new society, you usually do it as a mass meeting. You send out a call. All the interested people who want to talk about a rose bush club or something in this area, come by, and we're going to have a meeting and adopt bylaws and elect officers. The criteria was that you're interested. The local assembly of an organized society is the second kind. This would be that rose bush club once it's formed. This is your Rotary Club. This is all of your Republican auxiliary clubs. This is something where you need to usually be a dues-paying member in good standing, and they're going to have meetings, and you're going to be invited to participate. And even if you're interested in their goals, you're not necessarily a voting member because you're not affiliated with them directly. The county Republican Party is kind of like this. We're elected members, but we start to have some of these characteristics. The various affiliate clubs, the Assembly, the Northeast Club, the Southwest clubs are very directly that kind of organization. Third is the convention, and you're fairly familiar at this point with what the conventions are. You're elected delegates inside of a society. The members of the society come together in some form and elect people to be representatives to a centralized location where they're going to act as representative form of government, Republican form of government. The legislative body has some things in common with conventions, but some things very different. Obviously, Texas legislature, U.S. Congress, city council, school boards. Not really school boards, they don't pass laws. County governments, commissioners' courts, they're elected, they come together, they pass laws, right? The boards of directors often exist inside one of these organizations. So you might have an organized society that has an executive board that meets. You might have a corporation that has a board of directors that meets, and the requirements are fairly specific there. The members came together at a convention and elected a board that's going to carry on the business for the next several cycles or whatever it is. Those are the types, again, just listing. The last thing it talks about in that section, though, is the fact that different types of groups automatically get different types of consideration under Robert's rules, which is a point that often gets missed. A small board or a small committee explicitly has different rules from a group of 300 people. So if you ever participated in a committee of a convention and it was 10, 15 people, and they're still acting very, very formal, and the chair is not interacting except to call on people, and someone says, I move, we can't talk, we can't debate, we don't have a motion on the table, or we can't talk about that, we don't have a second. All these kinds of things, they explicitly don't apply. It's not just that it's easier to go without them, they don't apply in a small board or a committee. There is no second requirement. There is no calling the question to end debate. You're expected to be there and just participate and get the work done. A committee's formed to accomplish a task, no matter how long it takes. The chair is expected to be the one kind of driving that task, participating, making the motions, making it move forward, making sure it gets done. They're not supposed to be standing off from afar. Although, if the room gets argumentative, it's the chair's job to, deal with that fairly.
Okay, so Jeremy?
Yeah.
If I'm sitting on rules and Tom Washington happens to be the chair, and he says, well, your motion dies for lack of a second.
He's wrong. So look up that part and have it ready for your next meeting. That one is very poorly understood. I think the book actually says it's in a group of around a dozen, so the 15 people will walk the line. If I'm chairing those committees, I always use the small board rules because they're clearly effective there. I can't remember if it says 12 or 15, but it's that range.
There are 9. So.
Yeah. Next thing the book talks about, rules of an assembly or organization. Again, there are different kinds of rules, and it's worth understanding these and how they interact with each other. In the party, we get into some gray areas here in that we're a unique kind of organization, so we have documents that kind of have characteristics of multiple of these, but you can make them fit. And these go from the most immutable things that in a meeting you can't touch to the things that in a meeting it's a rule you have, but a majority can set it aside and ignore it if they need to do something, which confuses some people. They're used to rule of law, rule of rules, meaning rules are things you can't set aside, but that's not the case. For example, you might have a rule limiting debate to 3 minutes, and someone gets up and speaks for their 3 minutes, and they would like to talk for longer, and people want to let them talk for longer. The majority can say, go ahead and talk for 3 more minutes. And you didn't like inviolate what just happened or, you know, commit a crime there. The rules of order are there to facilitate an orderly meeting, and they're there to serve the body. They're not laws like while you're debating you can't shoot someone. You know, that's not a thing you can set aside. It's a different kind of thing. Most basic kind of thing, bottom level they list is a corporate charter. Applies to corporations obviously, but if you have a corporation that comes together, develops a corporate charter, usually under some state law framework, this is what your corporate charter has to look like. Name a treasurer, name your CEO, that kind of thing. That's immutable and stays that way with only certain ability to be amended. Next thing though that most organizations are used to dealing with, constitutions and bylaws. This is a document that you develop when you come together, or usually just once, and this is again a place where the political parties tried in some weird areas, but you form a new organization, your Rosebush Club, and they come together in their first meeting, they develop bylaws and a constitution, and they put in those bylaws that these can only be amended by a 2/3 vote with notice of 2 weeks given type provisions. Those things are, because they're in your bylaws, they're immutable. You can't later on amend your bylaws by just half the people in a room with no notice giving voting to amend them. You don't have that in your power. Your bylaws have provisions, and those provisions have to be respected, and your group can't change them except for the way the bylaws provide for their own amendment, with very rare exceptions for certain types of rules that we'll touch on next, actually, because the next type of rules you might adopt are things called rules of order. Rules of order are rules that have to do with parliamentary procedure, facilitating that process. So, for example, limits on debate, limits on quorum, notice requirements, these types of things. Notice requirements are not really, but mostly the things that take effect at a given meeting, like limits on debate. Rules of order can be suspended by the body if they need to, even if they're in the bylaws, even if they're in Robert's Rules of Order. So if you're at a meeting and you've got something that is clearly a rule of order and the majority wants to set it aside for a specific purpose, like your bylaws say 3 minutes for debate, you can vote to set it aside for that purpose. Robert's Rules of Order has certain things like that. We've run into situations where we've suspended specific rules of order from Roberts because they were rules of order. We could do that. They were standing in the way of the majority getting its business done after it had respected minority rights. The other most common type of rule that you're going to have in a document next to rules of order are things called standing rules. These are rules that have the same kind of principles that you abide by them. You can suspend them usually if you need to, as long as they're not embedded in your bylaws. But they're things like, we will have these committees formed, and we will have these reports, we will have this order of business type stuff. Organizational issues, purpose issues. The party is weird, like I said, because we adopt documents at the county and state level that we call bylaws, because they look a whole lot like bylaws. But the parties are not persistent organizations. We're in a funny area of the law where we exist because we have achieved ballot access in the previous cycle and maintained that ballot access. So we have a renewing aspect to what we do. But every 2 years at the primary, the Republican Party of Texas's membership completely reforms itself. No one right here is a member of the Republican Party of Texas because of something you did in 2006 or even 2012. You're a member, you're an affiliated Republican in Texas because you voted in this cycle's Republican primary or you took the oath of affiliation. You will be a member of this party until the end of this voting year, and then you won't be anymore. Period. Because all those go away. Law changed this time, and you can re-affiliate more easily now. You don't have to wait till the next primary, but bottom line is you don't have persistent party membership in parties in Texas and other places as well. So every 2 years, we form a new group that has, process handed to us by the group before to get us to our convention. But once we're in our convention or once our new EC comes together, and has its organization. We need to consider rules for itself. We're not bound by what the last group did. We're bound. The county's bound by what the state's done, etc. But we're able to adopt our own rules that usually look like the last ones and amended and are modified, but we're not actually amending something adopted in the past. So we don't have bylaws that have that characteristic. What we tend to adopt are a set of standing rules and rules of order that we're going to use for the next 2 years. The last category the book lists, though, outside of any of the rule categories, is custom, because often you will have a custom in a group that we've always done it this way and no one's cared before. Customs are kind of a no blood, no foul thing. If you've always done it that way and no one's complained before, you're not causing any grief. The moment someone says, well, we need to have a rule for this, or especially says this is in violation of some principle or something else, then yeah, you got to deal with it. And a custom that violates a rule immediately falls away when it's noticed that it does. Other customs persist until you need to make them into a rule. Those are your types of rules, and some of you are going, wow, what did I get into? This is really going to go through the book. It is. Conduct, it starts to get more interesting, I promise. Like I said, the main idea is to know where these things are, because you'll be at a meeting where the overlap in rules is relevant, and now you know where to find it. Chapter 2, Conduct of Business in the Deliberative Assembly. You have some basic provisions here. These are words you've probably heard before. You have the notion of a quorum. How many of the members of this group have to be here and participating for this business to be legitimate business? You have your minimum officers that every deliberative assembly needs, and that comes down to you've got to have a presiding officer, aka the chair, and you need to have a secretary, someone taking notes and minutes so that you know what you did. Sometimes those are the same person, but it's better if they're two. You have your patterns of formality that, again, the book touches on briefly here, but then we'll have entire sections on later. Issues like decorum, issues like in a deliberative assembly, if you're behaving yourself, the chair does not say, I think. The chair says the chair rules. You don't refer to yourself in the first person. You don't refer to other people at a microphone. I don't say, well, Jared just said the craziest thing I've ever heard. You don't say that. You say, the gentleman before me said some things I want to discuss. That's all about separating the process and the way you're getting to a goal from the personalities in the room. It's a deliberate choice to keep things civil. All right. Doesn't mean that there's not a grand tradition of booing people that need to be booed. Congress has had a grand tradition of fistfights on the floor. Those kinds of things can happen in certain situations, but you try to avoid any of that. You try to be polite and maintain decorum and patterns of formality is what the book calls it. Every meeting has in common that it's going to have a call to order, a time it starts, and it's going to have an order of business. There's a whole lot of ways you adopt the order of business. You may have, Roberts has a default order of business. If you don't have one defined elsewhere, you're supposed to follow that. You also may have in your bylaws or your standing rules, Tarrant County Republican Party in our standing rules has this is our order of business at every meeting. If you don't have those, then when you have a meeting and you show up at the meeting, you're supposed to adopt an agenda. Somebody mailing you an agenda ahead of time saying this is what we're going to do, that's informational. That is not the adopted agenda of the meeting unless it's again coming from your bylaws or your standing rules. If they're just saying I'm calling a meeting, a regular meeting, and this is what we're going to do, that's not the actual agenda till you get there and adopt one. Now, if it's a special meeting under your rules called for a specific purpose, that's different. And I'm going into detail on that because it's come up a lot in the last couple of years. Is the agenda they mailed out the meeting agenda? It depends. Probably not. And then you have how stuff gets brought before you to discuss it. You're going to have a meeting. You're going to be sitting there discussing things, right? That's the whole point. Free and full debate, coming to a conclusion, things you're going to do in the name of the whole group. How do you bring those things up? Book talks about 3 ways, and they're basically all come down to a motion is made. But there's 3 ways you can make a motion. You could have a point in the agenda when it's appropriate for someone to hit a microphone and say, I move this. Is there any new business? Get up, I move that we allocate $2 million from general revenue to buy the land next to us and put in a parking lot. That's a motion an individual member brought up. You may also have a motion arising out of a report. You may have the committee that you made at the last meeting to look into the parking problem come at the point in the agenda to give their report and say, we researched all of this stuff, we talked to these different landowners, these different construction companies, and we're suggesting the body allocate $2 million from general revenue to buy the property next to us to build a parking lot, and on behalf of the committee, I move this report's adoption. You may also have business that comes up without a motion because of previous action. Beginning of a meeting, you may adopt a special order that at 2 p.m. we're going to stop to have Rick Perry speak to us. And at 2 p.m., that's the thing that happens. You may have formed a committee to look into the parking problem, and they're just not getting the work done. So you make a motion to discharge the committee and bring that matter back in front of you, and that can happen. That's a little bit weedy, but those are the ways it talks about, and we'll kind of get into some of those as we go. But however you get there, the next item is how the heck do you handle a motion? And this is one of the most important parts in this first 100 pages. And if you look at the handout, you will see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps there, and they're split up into 7 sections, kind of, because there's 3 parts to this, and each one of them has some sub-steps. So the very first thing, if you want to make a motion, is you have to seek recognition and obtain recognition. Okay? You have to obtain the floor. How do you do that? Normally, if it's a very formal room using Robert's Rules of Order, you're all sitting down, and somebody in the audience stands up and says, "Mr. Chair," and then sits down, and the chair stands up and says, "So-and-so, Delegate Tyree," and that person stands up. They've sought and they've obtained the floor. The bottom line is you got to get recognized by the chair. Chair needs to acknowledge you. If you're in a room like our conventions where you've got microphones, you're standing in line at the microphone, your turn at the microphone comes up, you stand there, and the chair says, "Mr. Blosser," whatever, some way acknowledges you, now you have the floor. You've sought and gained recognition. That's part 1. Part 2 is making the motion, okay, getting the motion in front of the group. And there's multiple steps to that because there's a chain of custody thing that happens. And this is one of the parts that gets the most confused by well-meaning people, so we're going to spend a little bit of time on it. 3 steps to this. First of all, the person who obtained the floor makes their motion. I move that we allocate $2 million from general revenue to purchase the property next to us and build the parking lot. And that's step 1. You made the motion. Step 2, somebody seconds the motion. Seconding is one of those things that people try to use as a weapon. You didn't get, we're an hour into debating this stupid thing, and I just realized no one ever seconded it, so point of order, no one ever seconded this. You're not in order at that point. Your objection is invalid, because the principle here is that seconds are kind of meant as a rule of thumb. They're a bit of a fuzzy rule. The point is that 2 people have to want to talk about something before you talk about it. You have to have at least a minority of 2 to talk about something. If you've already been debating this thing back and forth for an hour, 2 people wanted to talk about it. So you've lost your objection because the second is inherent in what's happened. Okay? The chair, if someone makes a motion and the chair is positive, you've been arguing about this stupid parking lot issue for a month, and you clearly need more parking. The chair knows that people want to talk about this. The chair can not even bother asking for a second and move on. Okay? You've got your motion, you've heard the motion, let's debate it. That having been said, it is still a valid point of order. From the moment somebody makes a motion until debate actually starts, it's a valid point of order to say we haven't had a second yet. You can pop up and say we need a second for this, and the chair needs to, compel the chair to seek a second. That's okay. Just understand that if 2 people want to talk about it, if the chair is the second person, you've gotten there. This is also why nominations don't require a second. Rule of thumb style. If you nominate somebody and they accept the nomination, 2 people accepted that thing, move on. Doesn't mean that you can't nominate yourself, or if you nominate yourself, someone else has to second it. The rule is nominations don't require a second, but that helps you remember why. But the first step was someone made the motion. The second step was someone seconded the motion. The third step is critical here. The chair states the question. This is that chain of custody. From the moment you make the motion, it belongs to you. And you can modify it as you're making it. You can have someone call out $3 million, and you can say, I move that we allocate $2 million from general revenue. I move we allocate $3 million from if you need to. If you hear things that you think are more appropriate for whatever reason, use one an example I usually use because it's easier to modify. I move that we recess at 12:30 and go to McDonald's for lunch. They're closed today. I move that we recess at 12:30 and go to Burger King for lunch. You own the motion. You can tweak it as you're saying it. Keep it reasonable. You're going to get stones thrown at you. Okay? That changes when the chair states the question. When the chair says, all right, we have a motion and second that we adjourn at 12:30 and go to McDonald's. The custody has moved from the mover of the motion through the chair to the entire body. And now you're in debate. If at that point someone pops up and says, oh, McDonald's is closed, I make a friendly amendment that we go to Burger King instead, and the person who made the motion says, yeah, I accept that, doesn't matter. You're in debate now. Okay? It doesn't matter if they say that as the first person to stand up after the chair states the question, or if they wait an hour into debate and say, I just realized you said McDonald's and they're closed today. Friendly amendment to make it Burger King. If somebody wants to say something that's not controversial, after debate has started and the custody of the motion has moved into the whole body, the chair's way to do that is to say, if somebody pops up and says, McDonald's is closed, can we do Burger King? And say, the chair says, without objection, we'll make this Burger King. And if no one objects, you're fine. What you've done there is you've taken, I want to make an amendment, your amendment gets seconded, is there any discussion? All in favor say aye, all opposed nay, and condensed it down to, is there any objection? Because if no one objects, then there's no debate, right? There's no need for a second, there's no need for debate, there's no need for any of that. You just get it done. That's the way to do shorthand and get to it faster. The time when someone can pop up and say, friendly amendment, would you change X to Y, is when the motion, and you don't have to have a formal amendment or a formal discussion or debate of that thing they want to change, is when the thing still belongs to the mover, which is that tiny window between when they make the motion and the chair states the question. Okay?
People can interrupt the person making the motion, just yell it out.
Within decorum. I mean, if it's really something that... I've been in several meetings where we've gone up there and we were trying to walk through something that was a little bit thorny. And I've been the one up there making a motion, and I'll talk slow. I'll say, I move that we do X, and then I'll pause, and people will yell things. And if there's not argument what I'm hearing, I'll just say the thing that I heard the most. And you got to be careful if you want to. You can be smart aleck or anything because you're gonna get stones thrown at you. You don't want to be too clever all the time. But that's a place where someone who's on the floor, who knows what they're doing and how things works, can help the body get through. Because it's way faster to do it that way, to make a motion that the whole room's just going to accept without, with very minimal debate, than it is to argue over whether it should be 12:30, 12:45, 1:15, and have a motion and an amendment for each one of those. The time to get through the part that nobody really cares about, but you just need to get to a quick majority answer, is inside that early window if you can get it there. But again, don't belabor it and don't try to get too clever. Don't spend an hour between making the motion and the chair you're out of order if the chair is, spending that long to state the question. But it does come up at times.
You have to be recognized though at the mic in order to do that, correct?
Make the motion, yes, but you've got the recognition. If somebody else is making comments at you or suggesting, just pop up real quick, friendly amendment, would you consider this because, and the person can say, yeah, that's my motion.
So they say it from back here and you're at the
Whatever.
mic and you can just accept
This is one of those places where it's informal until it's a problem. When that happens, do you need to go to the person who seconded you and make sure they agree with the change? No, because they seconded your original motion, right? And now you're changing your motion, and they're just going to say, is there a second to that? And maybe it's the same person, maybe it's somebody else, maybe it's the one that asked you to change. This is very much no blood, no foul territory. If nobody's objecting to what's happening, you're getting your business done. That's the purpose of the rules. They're serving their purpose. But bottom line, when you're way into debate and someone pops up with a friendly amendment, it is not within the right of the mover of the motion to just accept that on the behalf of the entire body. The entire body has to do that, but they can do that without objection if the chair believes there's not an objection to it. As soon as there's an objection, you need that as an amendment, you need a second, you need the debate, discussion, and the vote on the amendment. Anyway, those are those three steps on part 2. Putting the question, very important. The other important part of putting the question, apart from chain of custody, is understanding that the words that come out of the chair's mouth are what you're debating. You're not debating what the guy at the mic said. So the chair putting the question is important, stating the question is very important, needs to be correct. The mover needs to be, yes, that's my motion. That's how you get it down from a guy at the mic saying, well, I think we should maybe, no, blah, 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 no, blah, 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 no. Get through all of that, make them give it to you in writing, whatever, get to something, and then the chair cuts all the ums and the buts and the reversals out and says, the motion is this. Is there any discussion? Once you've got the question stated by the chair and it belongs to the body, you move into debate. Three parts to that, debate and disposition of the motion. 3 parts to that. You debate it, possibly you amend it. When you amend something, you're dealing with another motion, and you start that whole process over again where someone sought recognition, made their amendment motion, got seconded, debate. It's a little bit circular, or recursive rather. But whatever, you debate it, you get down till you're done debating it, or till debate is ended for some reason. And then the next part of that, part two of section 3 there, is the one with the slash, because there's 2 parts to it. The chair puts the question. Part 1 of that is the chair, again, says the words of the motion. They maybe were modified by amendment, or maybe they weren't, but the chair says, all right, the question is, should we allocate $2 million from general revenue by the property make a parking lot? Or the question is, should we adjourn at 12:30 and go to lunch at Burger King? And then you have the vote. All in favor say aye, opposed nay. Part 1, part 2. And then the last piece is the chair announces the vote and what's going to happen, what the result is. The ayes have it, the motion carries. We will allocate $2 million from general revenue. We will recess at 12:30 for lunch and go to Burger King. So, obtain the floor, make a motion, seconded, the chair states the question, members debate the motion, the chair puts the question, which includes saying the words and having a vote, the chair announces the result of the vote. That's how you handle a motion. Again, covered in a few pages up here in the first 100, covered in entire chapters on debate and entire chapters on amendments and everything else later on in the book. This will go through the different types of voting you can use even right here. Ayes, an oral vote, ayes and nays. Division of the assembly, stand up, don't count, but just visible. Show of hands. Whether or not the chair can vote. These kinds of things. Chair always has the right to vote as a member, but it's good form. You don't usually cast a vote unless it will change the result. So if the vote is 100 to 2, the chair doesn't have any need to vote. If the vote is 99 to 100, the chair can vote with the 99, make a tie, make it fail. If the vote is 100 to 100, the chair can vote and break the tie. Sometimes the chairs will step out of that. If the vote is 400 to 0, they'll bother to say, the chair wants to note the chair's voting aye, making it unanimous, those kinds of things. Talks through when you use unanimous consent and acclamation type things, etc. Then we move on, and chapter 3 is going to talk about all the motions that exist. And what their standard characteristics are, what they all have in common. So there are several classes of motions. Oh, you're short on time. Well, here we go. Main motion is the thing you're usually dealing with. You're always dealing with some kind of main motion, whether it's a committee report gave you a motion at a convention, the nominations report gives you their report, that's the main motion. Or whether it's where new business is their motion, move for the parking lot thing. These kinds of things are all ways that you get a main motion on the floor. It's what you put up there to start talking about when you don't have something else to talk about. We also have what are called subsidiary motions. These are things that always apply to the main motion. So these are things like an amendment, postponing things, sending things to committees, laying things on the table, things that always have, an object that is a main motion. And we'll talk about some of those individually as we get to them if we have time. We also have privilege motions. Privilege motions don't apply to a motion. They're things that just come up from time to time. Point of order. Privileged motion. Call for the orders of the day. We're off the agenda. The agenda says we're supposed to do this at 2. It's 2. We need to do this. Raising a question of privilege. I can't hear the chair. I can't read the words on the screen. You know, those are irrespective of whatever motion you're considering. They come up. Motions to adjourn can be privileged motions, although there's several different ways to handle to where the word adjourn comes up and they're not all the same. Fixing the time to adjourn is another one. You know, these kinds of things. There's a list. Incidental motions are things that kind of are in gray areas. I should have listed point of order as an incidental motion, sorry. They're not necessarily appropriate at all times, but that they come up at certain times. They have some of the characteristics of a subsidiary motion, but not all of them. Point of order, appealing the decision of the chair, objecting to the consideration of a question. There's a list here, 9, 10, 11.
Wait, what's objection?
Motions on how we're gonna do a vote or how we're gonna do nominations.
What's objecting to the consideration of the motion?
We'll get to that one, or ask me later because I'm trying to get through this by 7:30. Parliamentary inquiries, requests for information, questions. These are all in this category. Knowing the exact category that stuff's in really is not something most people care about. And then you have motions, though, the last category, motions that bring a question again before the assembly. This is something you dealt with before, and you either put it off until now, or you voted on it, but someone's changed their mind, they want to talk about it again, or you send it to a committee and they're either reporting or you're making them come back and take the thing back from them. Standard descriptive characteristics of motions you care about, though, because when you get into that long section of these are all the types, these are all the motions and all the things about them, these are all the things about them. They are what the precedence is. The heck does that mean? That's what can this motion apply to? Like a motion to amend has to apply to a main motion. Otherwise it makes no sense, right? Easy way to understand precedence. But there's a whole tree out there, and there's things that yield to other things that come in a higher, if we're dealing with a motion to table something, we can't do this other thing instead until we deal with the table. To what motions, to what things it's applicable, similar idea. Whether it's an order when someone has the floor, whether you have to get recognition or whether you can interrupt. Point of order is interrupting, right? Question of privilege is interrupting. Objection to the consideration is interrupting. We get to that one. Whether it requires previous question is not an interrupting motion. A lot of people think it is. It's not. When someone's talking or someone's seeking recognition, being recognized, you can't just call out previous question and have it override everything else. Whether it requires a second or not, whether it's debatable, whether it's amendable, if it's a majority or a 2/3 vote to adopt it, and whether it can be reconsidered, brought back up later. So for all the other ones, no matter how far we get tonight, for all the other ones that are in there, when you look at that big section with all the descriptive characteristics, it's going to tell you this is the motion, this is when you use it, this is whether it can be amended, whether it has to be seconded, whether it's debatable, all those pieces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all 8 of them is going to be there, and then there's going to be scripts on these are the words you actually say. Chapter 4, meetings and sessions. Now we're back to listing different types of things.
So if you don't say the words exactly the way...
The chair's got an obligation, if they can tell what you're trying to say, to help you say it.
Oh, okay.
Bottom line. They don't have an obligation to stand there for an hour if it's not clear. But if you get up and say, "Stop the," I move we stop debating this and move on. They're supposed to help you say, make it the right way. And you don't really need to worry if you get. You don't have to say at the side, "I want to make the subsidiary motion to this." You never have to say that. That's just mostly a matter of understanding what things apply to other things. Main thing to know about meetings is that you can have meetings that last one day and then they're never relevant again, like our SD conventions. We have that one day and then we're done. And we did things that have effect, but we don't come back in the SD conventions in a week. You also have some things that last over, one session that's multiple meetings. State convention is one session. It's a convention, but it's one session with multiple meetings. You may also have our county party meeting at the beginning of this last cycle where we had 3 or 4 meetings in our organizational meeting session. We kept adjourning to a different day but continued the same meeting. If you're in a group where that comes up, you find it all in whatever chapter I'm in, chapter 4. Talks about recess, talks about adjourning, that's where you find that. Talks about the limits on debate and how they renew between sessions. Talks about time limits. A quarterly interval is a magic number in Roberts. If you've got a group that has regular meetings and they happen every quarter, then you have certain provisions, like if you put something on the table at one meeting, it's still on the table at the next quarterly meeting. But if you have your regular meetings 120 days apart, then that didn't happen. After the quarterly interval, the table was done and you start over. That kind of stuff's in here. Types of meetings. Another list. You have your regular meetings, so you have an organized society like the county party that meets every other month. That's a regular meeting. It's defined in our bylaws. You have a special meeting. So you might provide a case where we're going to meet off of our regular schedule. County party had a special meeting last week on the 13th, as required by law. The Tarrant County Republican Party met in this office. Quorum was members present who showed up, so probably the chair and the secretary, nobody else. And they canvassed the election returns from the primary, and they had the ballot draw for the runoff elections. That was a meeting of TCGOP, but it wasn't one of our every other month meetings, and doesn't have the same quorum requirements. An adjourned meeting, which is what we did earlier on in the cycle, where you have a meeting, you don't get done with your business for some reason, you want to keep going, so you basically push pause on your recorder, your VCR, and then you come back in a month and push play, and you pick up exactly where you left off. It's not 2 meetings that happen a month apart, it's 1 meeting that happens a month apart. Annual meeting, we don't deal with those, the convention's kind of closed, but your Rosebush Club might have your every other month or your every quarterly meeting. You might also have an annual meeting in your bylaws that has certain characteristics. Those are types of meetings, reasons you come together, but then each one of those could have different characteristics on how public they are. You can have your regular meeting where it's open to your members and your guests unless you have rules about which guests are allowed, right? It's in your power to set those rules. You may have an executive session where you're going to deal with discipline or crazy budget stuff that your bylaws require to go into executive session. Executive session means no guests allowed. Members of the body are allowed, and they can make exceptions, but in general, they're locking it down to just themselves, and nobody can talk about what happens in there. It's a private meeting, and it has to stay that way. If somebody goes out of executive session and tells you what happened, they're open to themselves to disciplinary action. You may also, in a legislative body, you have a public session. So you have a meeting you can't close. It has to be open to the press. It has to be open to the public. You can't have a quorum of the members even talking to each other over lunch, or it's illegal. We don't have public meeting requirements in the party, but we do, as a subunit of the state party at our conventions, have requirements given to us that are semi-public. All of our committee meetings have to be open to all delegates, alternates, Republican Party office holders, candidates, party officials, and they're all allowed to record and they're all allowed to testify. And it's not up to the convention to change that. Electronic meetings are discussed in here. Like I said, Roberts has an issue with those because it's difficult for everybody to hear each other and to interrupt each other when they need to and stuff like that, but it gives you a blueprint for how to head in the right direction. It also makes explicit that in the 11th edition that you can't just have a teleconference because you want to. You have to meet in person unless your bylaws provide a method for a non-face-to-face electronic meeting. So people have asked me from time to time, can my convention committee meet over the phone? No, because we don't have that allowance given to us. I assume at some point it'll show up, but it hasn't yet. Meeting types. Okay, and then we get into, like I said, the bulk of it. And we have an entire chapter on the main motion. We talked about it briefly. We talked about how you handle it. But we go on for a long time here. Here are its standard characteristics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 across 2 pages. Here's the wording. Here's how you submit things in writing. Like I said, it gets down to where you use a comma and a semicolon when you do a written resolution. And whether you use a resolved or be it resolved. It's all in here. Your resolution is not invalid if you get that wrong. But if you care, that's the level of detail the book goes into. That's why it's scary big. Doesn't need to be scary big. We have main motions that are not in order at certain times, how they're supposed to, treatment of main motions. Scripts. Member A obtaining the floor. I move that the society contribute $100 to the centennial celebration. Receives a second. The chair. It is moved and seconded that the society contribute $100 to the literally, scripts are in here. It will hold your hand. Notice requirements and how they apply. Some things you can only, preserving the rights of people not there sometimes means that to do something, you got to give notice ahead of time. There's a format. Member obtains the floor. I give notice at the next meeting. I will move to rescind, yada, yada, yada. Motions to adopt and ratify. If things get taken that the whole, actions taken on behalf of the body without the body quite agreeing to it, that could be a bad thing, or the body could be fine and they could just move to ratify the action. If a committee met without a quorum, for example, that committee's work is not valid and thus ratified by a quorum of that committee that meets later on. That's the main vote. There's a lot in there, but I'm not going to belabor all of it. 15 minutes. I'm going to skim all those motions, all the other stuff you might care about. I'll come back to in a second, but just to run over them quick. The ones that are bold that probably can come up at a convention. So go home, get the book, and look at them. See what they do. Postpone indefinitely, postpone to a certain time, lay on the table. Those are the three ways you can put something away for now. They all have different effects. Postpone indefinitely means I want to kill this thing forever and never hear about it again. And if you do that when you're in debate, the majority votes with you, it's dead. Put a fork in it. It's gone. Postpone to a certain time means I want to put this away until 3 o'clock. Or we're in the middle of the platform discussion. This one, okay, we'll come back to this if we have time. We have other things. Let's postpone this until all the other platform resolutions are dealt with. It happens at one time. Majority votes to do it. And then when you hit that trigger, 3 p.m., or all the other resolutions have been dealt with no other action, it automatically comes back up. Okay? So one vote got you there. Table is the one people always use, and it's not the one they usually mean, because table requires 2 votes. You move to table something, you're putting it aside, and it's there. That's where it is. You didn't kill it, but you also didn't say we're going to bring it back. Later on, somebody has to move to bring it back from the table for you to bring it back up again. So if you want to, when people move to table something that they want to kill, they're just being rude, okay? They're claiming they're implying they're going to bring it back up later when they have no intention. And if you've got something that you want to talk about later on, don't table it and risk you can't bring it back. Tabling is useful mostly when you've got regular meetings of a body that are happening every quarter and you want to put something down until the next meeting. Okay, when you've got more research done or something. At a one-day convention, it's hardly ever what you mean. You usually want to postpone to a certain time or just kill it. Motion to amend is obvious enough. Commit or refer. I like to see this at conventions more. I'd like to see when there's 20 people at microphones for a platform discussion, and you don't want to, you want to let them all have their piece, but you don't want to do it all in front of the whole convention. Just say, how about if you 20 go form a committee in the back of the room and bring a recommendation to us in 15 minutes, and we're going to move on with the other things. And the 12 of them that's their one issue, they'll go do that. The other 8 that just care about everything will stick around for the next thing. Start thinking about using that at your conventions instead of limiting debate to 2 speakers for and against and 30 seconds per speaker. Okay? Operate in parallel a little bit.
Okay, so we would just make a motion to refer to a committee.
I make a motion that we refer this issue to a committee composed of the mover of the motion and the 5 people at each of these microphones. They meet in the back of the room and they'll report in 15 minutes. And if the report's not ready, you just forget about it.
Okay, and so I can just interrupt.
You got to get recognition. It's a motion. The motion to commit is a subsidiary motion applying to the main motion. But your chair might start thinking this way if you talk to him ahead of time. The Rules Committee intent is talking about recommending this to our convention as formally or informally a thing that they try to start doing, but we'll see. Running out of time. Previous question's important though. Previous question is vote thresholds. Talked about that briefly. There's majority, there's 2/3 thing. How does that work? Majority is what you usually need to do something, but if you're gonna step on somebody's rights in the process, if you're going to have a minority silenced in the process, unable to even continue talking, then it's a 2/3 threshold. So limits on debate. If your rules committee gives a report, we want to limit debate to 3 minutes. That's a 2/3 vote to make it happen. 3 speakers for and against. That's a 2/3 vote to make it happen. You can suspend it later with a simple majority because you're giving rights back. But it's a 2/3 to set up the rule in the first place. Methods of election, nominations, especially that rule that Republicans, for some reason, we all seem to love, except for those of us that try to stop it, that when you have an election, you're going to nominate 20 people, and then you're going to have a vote, and you're going to have a runoff. Or you're going to drop the lowest vote getter every time with this idea that will never get done otherwise. What you're doing there under Roberts is having multiple rounds of election, except that you're restricting who can be nominated on the subsequent rounds. And any motion to restrict the method of nomination is a 2/3 vote. Because you're telling someone you can't run in that second round, you can't nominate someone in that second round. Previous question, I want to stop debating this. Not debatable immediately requires a vote. If that carries, you stop debating it, you move on, you just vote on whether you're going to go to McDonald's or not. Is a 2/3 threshold under Robert's rules. However, our party rules that are the ones that choose Roberts for us and therefore can amend them and change them tell us that at a convention, not at a county party meeting, but at a convention, we have a majority threshold for the previous question. With the caveat that you can't move the previous question until you've had adequate time for debate and further nominations. What is adequate time for debate and further nominations? Can be fuzzy. At my conventions and several of the ones in Tarrant, we usually up front we say, we just said 3 speakers for and against is the limit on debate. That's adequate debate. We're not going to use the previous question. You might approach it a different way. In your privilege motions, call for the orders of the day is we're off the agenda. This one comes up at conventions because the election code and party rules both give us prescribed agendas. If you're at your SD convention and they're trying to do the rules report before the credentials report, they're breaking party rule. And a call for the orders of the day would be appropriate remedy to call that out. If you adopt an agenda at the beginning of the day that says we are going to have the nominations report at 3 p.m. no matter what, and at 3 p.m. you're halfway through the elected officials, someone could call for the orders of the day and compel you to either resolve that or change the agenda with a 2/3 vote at that point. Changing your agendas are 2/3 votes because they affect minorities in a major way when you do things. And they're often abused. It can often be abused otherwise to abuse minorities. Raising a question of privilege is about the most privileged thing you can do. This is like, usually I can't participate. It's other stuff too. I want to make a speech on my, authority as a reputable person or whatever, but I can't hear, I can't see, the building's on fire, this is impinging on my right as an individual to participate. Recess, adjournment, fixing the time which you adjourn are all in there. Incidental motions, big ones in there. Point of order. Point of order is misunderstood by a lot of people. They hear it all the time. And they think that that's the magic fake Latin phrase for I want to talk now. So they'll go to a microphone with point of order. Avoid doing that. Teach people not to do that because you give your good chairs a heart attack when you do that. Because point of order means you're cheating. The rules are being broken. It's your courtroom drama. Your Honor, I object. You don't pop up with Your Honor, I object. Can we recess for 15 minutes for a bio break? Don't do that. Point of order is the rules are being broken and it requires the chair to make a ruling on something. To either, sustain your objection or overrule it, or in parliamentary Robert's phrasing, your point of order is well taken or not well taken. It requires a ruling. But we're not in a courtroom and that ruling can be appealed. If the chair is not the judge, in a court of law, your courtroom drama, Your Honor, I object, your objection is overruled, you don't then turn to the jury and say, I'm the lawyer, turn to the jury and say, he's wrong, this is why, and then quick poll, and if a majority of them agree with you, your objection is sustained and the witness's testimony is stricken. Doesn't work that way in court, right? You have a judge. Roberts, you don't have a judge, you have a chair. Presiding officer's job is to facilitate and keep it fair. What happens in that room is the responsibility ultimately of the entire body. So if the chair makes a ruling,
The body either implicitly upholds that ruling or someone appeals it, gets a second, you debate it, you vote on it. There are very, very few places where the chair's ruling can't be appealed, and they're not even relevant to anything that people come up with most of the time. So if the chair gets it wrong, appeal them. Make sure you get it right. It's a, Roberts is a no blood, no foul scenario. If something is happening that's wrong right now and you ignore it, and then in a week you call me or the state party and say, this thing happened, it was abusive, how do I fix it? First question is going to be, did you object? Yeah, but he was overruled. Did you appeal the ruling? No. Well, you're in trouble now. I mean, there may be something we can do if whatever happened is still violating, a violation of someone's rights, there's a continuing breach happening. But the principle is you object. When it happens, you carry that objection all the way through. You don't just sit down and let it happen, or you lose a lot of your standing. People wonder why sometimes they watch some of us on videos at convention and we're yelling point of order at microphones in Tampa and not being recognized. Part of that, they're not going to recognize you. Part of that is crossing T's. Carry the objection all the way through so that you have standing to do something about it later if you can find, someone who wants to carry it forward. Part of it's just about doing the right thing. But suspending the rule. So you adopt the rule at the beginning of the day for 3 speakers, 4 against. I already touched on that one. You got a 4th speaker that wants to speak. You can suspend that rule. It's not like we made a rule. It's written in blood. Well, the same group that made the rule is sitting right here. Why the heck can't you change your mind or make an exception on this one? You're not breaking a 10 Commandments type thing here. Cannot suspend the rules RPT gives us, right? RPT gives us the election code, so we have to abide by that. But, we can suspend the ones that are in our power to suspend. Objection to the consideration of the question, the book will tell you, is similar to a point of order in a lot of its characteristics, but it basically means we shouldn't even talk about this thing. This guy's making a motion, and it shouldn't be allowed to even get to the chair stating the question. Once you get into debate, you're past it. You are considering the question, it's too late to object. But if someone's up there making a motion that is just so egregious and a 2/3 majority will go along with you because that's the threshold, then you pop up, you can interrupt. I object to the consideration of the question. Usually you want to at least let them say what they're saying and then pop up before, right after they get done. Unless the words they're saying are actually going to catch the building on fire, let them finish talking. But it is an interrupting motion. It's in order when another has the floor. I object to the consideration of the question. No second required. The chair just immediately says, there's objection to the consideration of the question. All in favor, please stand. All opposed, please stand. 2/3 object to the consideration of the question. We're moving on. Stand because a 2/3 vote, I always forget to mention this till the wrong time. A 2/3 vote is always supposed to be standing, not counted, but at least standing, because it's really hard to hear 2/3. You can hear majority. One side sounds louder than the other. 2/3 vote is always supposed to be a standing vote. Consideration by paragraph or seriatim is very useful at a convention. This is, you got a big report, such as a platform report, that's split up into 6 sections, 30 paragraphs. You've got limits on debate, 3 for, 3 against. Are those 3 for, 3 against supposed to mean that every person only gets to talk? You only get 3 speakers on each side for the entire platform report? No, you don't mean that. You've got different sections. But at the same time, what you do in Section 3 might impact Section 6. So you don't just want to take Section 3, debate it, amend it, and then vote on it, and now you've got Section 3, and then move on to Section 4. Consideration by paragraph is a way to consider a report. The chair can apply on their own volition, or the group can direct it by a majority vote to do it. That says you're going to take each paragraph, whatever you define as a paragraph, each section of the platform, you're going to put it out there, you're going to look at it, you're going to have 3 for, 3 against. You're going to have amendments. You're going to vote on the amendments. And then you're going to get done with Section 1 and you're not going to vote on it. You're going to move on to Section 2 and do there. You're going to go all the way down. And when you're done with Section 6, you're going to say, okay, that was all 6 sections. Are there any amendments to the document as a whole now? Did we do something in 4 that means we got to change 2? Any of this kind of stuff. And you take that and then you have a vote on the entire document, up or down. A lot of our conventions do this on their own, but you all may not have noticed that's what was happening. Division of a question, I skip. That's if you've got a question that has multiple parts, I move that we go to lunch at 12:30 and we eat at McDonald's. Somebody moves, I move we divide that into, we go to lunch at 12:30 and we go to McDonald's because they want to debate the 12:30 but not the McDonald's or something. That's a majority vote to uphold it. Division of the assembly is one of those things. It's the right of a single member. It's one of the rare examples that bothers to be in it. It's the right of a single member. If the chair calls a voice vote, all in favor say aye, opposed nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. You don't agree with the chair, the nays have it. You yell, you call, again, in your seat, don't need to seek recognition. Division is the way people do it. They just yell out division, or you pop up, Mr. Chair, call for division of the assembly. Single member demand, no second, no debate, no option. The chair moves to all in favor, please stand. Be seated, all opposed, please stand. Doesn't have to be counted, but it has to be visual. The only time the chair gets to ignore that is if someone's calling division on every single vote because they're trying to make the convention last 6 hours so the people they don't like go home and they're the only ones left, then the chair can start ignoring them. Again, subject to the will of the majority of the body. Point of order, you're ignoring that call for division. He's being dilatory. That's why I'm ignoring him. I appeal the decision of the chair. Appeals are debatable or not depending on what they arise out of. Read the book for the answer there if it's debatable. Motions related to how you want to vote. Nominations are in there. Requests and inquiries. Two kinds. Point of information you hear often. And it's another one that gets misused all the time. People think that means I want to tell you something. They think it means debate has ended, but I can sneak something else in here. Previous question's been moved. No more debate. We're voting on McDonald's. Point of information. Does everybody know that McDonald's doesn't practice fair trade practices? You're debating. Stop it. We're past that now. Point of information is point of information. Does someone know if there's a McDonald's within 2 miles? Point of information, is that McDonald's open today? Point of information, are there any spots left open on the delegate list that we could still fill? Because it's misused so often, the 11th, one of the minor changes it made is it's no longer called point of information. It's now called request for information. But that will take some time for people to learn. Point of inquiry, point of parliamentary inquiry is I have a rules question, which point of inquiry, I want to make a motion that we should stop talking about this and vote on it. How do I do that? And again, you don't need to, it's okay. If you get up and say point of order, how do I make a motion we stop talking? Point of information, how do I make it? It's okay. The chair can tell what you say, but the more you start to learn the right ones, the clearer it is to those that are tracking what's going on, whether they're with you or not, what you're doing, and the smoother the whole day goes. The last class of motions, motions that bring a question again before the assembly. This is stuff that I mentioned earlier. You dealt with it once, you're bringing it back. So take it from the table. That motion is there. Reconsider is I changed my mind. So we adopted a motion to adjourn it or recess at 12:30 and go to McDonald's, and I voted for it, and then somebody who was in the minority and voted against it and got shot down or whatever comes over and tells me, I don't want to go to McDonald's because there's nothing there I can eat because I'm gluten intolerant. Personal experience here. I wanted to go to Jason's Deli, but no one wanted to go there because it's too expensive. But there's 20 of us that just can't get lunch, so we go to McDonald's. And they move you with their passion, and you're convinced you can now, because you voted with the prevailing side. They can't because they lost. But because you won, you can go to a microphone and move that we reconsider that vote to go to McDonald's. And then you need a second, which can be anybody. It doesn't have to be a winner or loser. It can be the ones that don't want to go to McDonald's. Once you have your second, you debate it. Your debate can go into why you changed your mind. It can go into the original question all day long. But when you vote on it, then if the majority prevails, if the majority votes yes to reconsider, you rewind. You're back to debating that motion before you adopted it. Do we go to lunch at 12:30 and go to McDonald's? And you can amend it from there. There are time limits on reconsideration. You can only do it basically in the same meeting. Okay, if it's been your 120 days, and maybe you adopted a resolution about that our organization's official mascot is I'm looking at names and I shouldn't say candidate names now. Is Subway Restaurants is our official sponsor, and Subway comes out I don't know, you don't want that anymore. You change your mind, and it's 120 days later. You can't reconsider that vote anymore. It's done. What you want then is a motion to rescind or amend something previously adopted, and it has its own criteria. It does not come up in a convention, but know that it's there. Discharging a committee is you sent something to a committee, they're not getting it done, or for whatever reason you're done with it being in the committee, you move to discharge the committee and bring that thing back to you. Yeah.
Well, so we in our committee meeting, we put in a comma. And so then, we passed a motion to reconsider putting in that comma because we wanted to take out that comma and another comma. So, we passed the motion to reconsider and amended that motion,
Yeah.
the amendment to say that we're gonna take out both commas. And the chair said we can't do that because we just reconsidered the one comma, we can't do both. Is that even remotely close to right?
Depends on how you got there, but if you're talking commas, I would think that you should have been able to get away with without objection. You
Yeah.
fix the commas. Which, I mean, without objection are two magic words that no one objects, no one's rights are being violated, and no one thinks the rules are being broken. You can do about anything with those two words that everybody wants to do. It becomes collapsed shorthand for all the motions you needed to get there. It's not that you didn't do all that stuff, it's that you just... What's the movie, The Fifth Element, when Lilo gives her name? Lilo, Sorry. We're at 7:30, so just real brief for any of you that didn't want this meeting, came for the other one. The next whole section of the book is, these are not listing descriptive characteristics of all motions. This is stuff that matters if you're a chair or if you're putting a society together, or you just want to know what all the words mean. You know, what does dilatory mean? How do I determine a quorum? How do I determine what my agenda is? I talked earlier about how you come up with your agenda. Well, there's the whole chapter on how you do it, or whole section on how you do it. Entire section on how you assign the floor, how you handle debate, in all the weird edge cases that come up. How you handle voting, how you handle nominations, officers' reports, boards, committees, the fund that is committee of the whole, what a mass meeting looks like, how you bring together a society, how you dissolve a society, all that kind of stuff is in there. Again, it's why the book is large and scary. You don't care about any of that for a convention. That's, what, a third of the book you're skipping, unless you actually care to get into it all. But then one of the ones that section does get into that is worth looking at is there's an entire chapter on conventions and what they look like and how they differ from other things. Check it out. Now there's another whole section on disciplinary procedures that I call out because at conventions sometimes it happens your chair is not treating you very well. What do you do about it? This is what you do about it. That's one thing the 11th spells out better. It's clearer now what you would do with a misbehaving chairman in a convention than it used to be. It's not like it's easy. At the end of the day, you got to assert rights in some of these situations. You've got to have a majority at least willing to say that rights are being violated. It can get loud. It's you shouting over the chair. To hold an election for a new chair while they're ignoring you, holding an election for a new chair. These are times when historically police get called by somebody or another and bloody noses happens. I'm not advocating any of that. I'm saying this stuff happens. I've been chased by cops on the floor of a convention. It happens.
Parking lot
Are you
conventions.
serious?
Yeah, when you've got a chairman of a group who doesn't want
He's manipulating.
well, this is the right place to throw in because this is the bridge between the two meetings, right? Somebody was sending out some precinct convention stuff recently, and they labeled it like 11 things they won't tell you about the precinct conventions. And one of the points in there was not everybody's your friend, not everybody's on your side, and this is politics. That's very true. And conventions held properly and fairly bring together people that don't agree with each other and let them find all those points I talked about at the beginning in full and free discourse, debate, find the things they want to do all together, and then deal with the other stuff. But you can walk. Sometimes you'll walk into conventions where either the current majority or a minority that just happens to hold the chair isn't interested in any of that. They're not interested in other opinions, and they're not acting in good faith, and they're not recognizing people who will. They're trying to hold control of the room often by making it look like they're the majority. So they'll have people that, in politics especially, there's a lot of there can be a lot of whisper campaigning, backstabbing. Don't listen to those people because this. They want you to do this because of this other thing. And if you get in that scenario, the worst thing for them is for you to actually get to say what you want. For you to actually get to talk to other people and debate, because then people hear, well, no, he doesn't want what I heard, he wants this other thing. So yeah, the 2008 state convention, we had, a group of new people coming in that were not very welcome, and we had a group that was, you had kind of a 30-30-30 split. You had 30 that didn't want anybody new there, you had 30 that were new, and you had 30 that were just kind of trying to figure out what's going on. And so the 30 that were new were trying to get out their information. Like, there was a convention in Texas where evidence shows that they threw out elected delegates, replaced them with unelected delegates, some of whom were Democrat primary voters, some of whom were non-registered voters. We had people sitting on the state convention floor who absolutely were illegal to be there, is what the documentation we're talking about showed. And we were trying to introduce that to the convention to deal with the challenge. And that 30% that was in charge didn't want that other 30% to hear any of it. So yeah, microphones turned off, points of order not well taken, objections completely ignored.
Police called a committee.
Reconsideration brought forward because we finally got a different chair that we thought would listen and wouldn't. And yeah, eventually police coming, for... Somebody had a tape of the convention in question and wanted to play it in the credentials committee room and wasn't allowed to. And they were going to bring the cops to prevent them from playing the tape. They brought the cops to not let me sit in the room, even though I wasn't saying anything. For no good reason that any of us understand, except that I'm one of the ones that'll teach you Robert's Rules class. I don't know. It was all fun. It's not 2008 anymore, though. It's just not 2008 anymore. We got new party leadership in 2010 that have been great. Nobody's perfect, but they've worked on having the debate open and available to a fault, like to the point that even fair people get tired of the discussion. And they're adding an entire day to the convention this year to have more time for discussion and debate. So it's not 2008 anymore. At the state level, at the Tarrant County level, there are other parts of the state that still have problems. There are parts of the state where they've taken these tapes into their own county to train people on what's going on, and their county party chair has shown up and been very angry and not wanted to have the video, not wanted to have the training even happen, and do your own training, whatever. But that kind of stuff's still happening. And if you're in those counties, then hopefully this stuff's useful to you as well. But don't give up. Anyway, questions. We're into the 7:30 window when I'm supposed to be doing SD training. I don't know how many of you are here for that as well, but maybe it's the same group. But questions on Robert's Rules stuff? You're going, oh my gosh, that was a lot. Hopefully, though, you can pick up the book now and look at it and find what you're looking for. And you can look at the video later if you need to look stuff up. Goodbye.